All right, folks, James Swift of Uncommon Journalism here, also with my trusty co-host, Kristen M. Gilotti. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing great, and greetings, fellow peeps. It's great to be back.
I love any serial references. I'm a fan of. All right, so obviously, when you think about horror movies, you tend to think Halloween. You tend to think the fall season. You tend to think dark and dreary. But there's actually a subgenre out there I like to call summertime scares. These are movies that are either set during summertime or are kind of summertime adjacent, touching upon summertime things like beach going, vacations, things of that nature. Camping, of course, would be another big one. So me and Miss Gilotti here sat down and carved out a list of 10 summertime themed horror movies, ranking them from most avoidable to absolutely you have to see them. So anything you just want to say, cursory about this kind of subgenre of horror film before we begin?
Yes, and I'd like to start off by saying, well, as we know, July is waning, but the unprecedented COVID lingered and worsened with uptick numbers in cases every single day. Therefore, these 10 summer horror movies are a must-watch in the midst of the plague. And throughout the past few weeks, I've been pondering over these films because not only are they summer themed, but they have infectious and stranded-based plots. Whether a victim of the blood-sucking Brady Bunch, exploring Leatherface's humanized home, or trapped in the graveyard with brain-eating zombies, once encountering the inevitable, there is no turning back. And I'm really excited to critique the elements of these movies because they somewhat tie into what we are currently facing, and that is being trapped. And on a quick side note, there are also comical parts to the film, so audiences will hopefully have numerous laughs in addition to scares.
Well, you know what? I can't think of a better way to set the table than that. So I say we get straight into the countdown here with number 10 on our list of summertime scares, a very obscure movie, perhaps the most obscure movie having the entire countdown. From 1987, it is Summer Camp Nightmare. So I guess my initial thoughts on this one is when you go into a movie called Summer Camp Nightmare and you realize it came out in the late 1980s, you're going to kind of think that, it'd be sort of a slasher movie. It would be kind of a rip-off Friday the 13th, Sleepaway Camp, but no, this movie goes a very, very different direction. So what were your just initial cursory thoughts on this film?
Summer Camp Nightmare. I mean, what can I say about this film is that it's a clone of Lord of the Flies. I gave it a number 1 because it's a movie to watch at your leisure with nothing else to do. When I say that it sort of steals Lord of the Flies is because the plot is the boys disagree with their adamant director's rules and regulations. Therefore, the main counselor invents new leadership, quote, policies, and of course, things get uncontrollable, and the boys even invade the girls' camp. I do think that the tagline does sum up the plot, and to quote here, it started as a game, campers against counselors. It turned into a nightmare that became a revolution. And again, that's what this Summer Camp Nightmare is about. Again, unrehearsed acting, no really special effects or props, just a typical cheesy horror movie that, again, this gets a number 1 rating, especially when you're bored out of your mind. And again, it goes back to Lord of the Flies where the boys cannot disagree on who should be the leader or who should take charge, that they go crazy, they go hostile, and they start killing each other as well as themselves. So it's, again, this is definitely a number 1, I have to say.
Yeah, watching this movie, I think probably the best way to describe it from my perspective is it's Ernest Goes to Camp meets Red Dawn, where all of a sudden,
Wonderful comparison.
yeah, it's a movie where you kind of start off with it's a very sort of meatball-ish, kind of camp comedy vibe to begin with, but then it slowly deteriorates, like you said, into the Lord of the Flies ripoff. I think probably the only thing, well, there are 2 things about this movie that I think make it worth going out of one's way to see. Number 1 is a performance by Chuck Connors as the camp counselor, one of the greatest unsung, unheralded B-movie actors of all time. I think he does a great job here. even though it's a movie for only like 3 or 4 lines, really. But the thing that I really took away from this movie, the only thing I really remember vividly about watching it is the final scene with the rope bridge.
Oh, yes.
So, and without kind of spoiling the ending, the entire movie kind of ends with like, the communist revolutionary kids overthrowing the camp, and basically they're trying to exile the heroes of the movie, and they make them, risk their life by walking this rope bridge. But the thing is, it's only like 5 feet off the ground.
Yes. And again, that goes back to the tagline where it says, it turned into a nightmare that became a revolution, especially with these kids.
It's just one of those things where it's like, it's not that perilous of a thing, but hey, whatever. The thing is, I don't hate this movie. I just think that it's kind of misleading. It's not really kind of my genre, but it's enjoyable. I mean, it's entertaining. If you're looking for something off the beaten path, you could do a whole lot worse. But as far as summertime scares go, I just don't think it's really of the highest level. You can easily skip this one, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving along to number 9. And get ready, because there are going to be a lot of Stephen King-centric movies on this countdown today. Coming in number 9 from 81, or I forget the year.
Are you referring to the Funhouse?
Oh, this one is Cujo.
Cujo. Oh, okay, my mistake. Yes. Yes, coming to Cujo, which came out in 1983. And first of all, speaking of Stephen King, credits to him because not only was it based on his novel, but he also did the screenplay for Cujo. And I'd like to take a moment to say that Stephen King inspired me to become a writer. I mean, I am just enthralled by his world of fiction, as some of his stories are based on his real life and surroundings. Like, for example, he composed Pet Sematary because he was mourning the loss of his pet. And The Shining also takes place when he was stranded for a season, maybe even more, kind of like what we are going to. But although Cujo is not as terrifying, it definitely has a reflection of Stephen King's stories. They're very grotesque, very horror, and he's just filled with crazy ideas. But again, I give this movie what would you say, number 9 or number 2?
I think this one comes in at number 9 on our countdown.
Okay, so for a countdown with number 9, and again, no offense to Cujo, it has nothing to do with the acting, the storyline, the props, the effects, but I'm a dog lover, and Cujo is the horror version of Old Yeller. So rather than being petrified, I am devastated about Cujo. I mean, it breaks my heart to see mankind's best friend get bitten by a rabid bat, and a once playful pup transforms into a vicious clawed monster. But the positive part about Cujo is the plot enhances as it also focuses on the family's weakened relationship. As Dee Wallace's character, she portrays the mother having an affair with a former high school friend. Her husband's job is declining, and they also have their only son, who nearly died of dehydration and heat stroke while being trapped in the car with his mom by Cujo. I mean, he barely made it out. So if anything, once Cujo dies, I mean, that really brings the family together, which is, I mean, one good element of the movie. And also credits to Dee Wallace, as she played a motherly role in this film, as well as E.T., Critters, etc. So if anything, she's kind of like the mom actress.
Yeah, there were about 2 or 3 movies on this countdown. I had to go back and watch them and seen in many, many years. And one of the things that kind of surprised me in this movie is just how subplot heavy it was. Because I used to want to think of it when I was watching as a kid. The entire movie is just about the mom and her kid and the dog chasing after them. That's the entire movie. But no, that's actually only kind of like half the entire picture. So I was kind of surprised by how much more nuanced the overall picture was than that.
Yes. And again, that's why I was going on to, again, it focuses on the family's relationship, how they are drifting apart, and then they become close. And but again, it still breaks my heart to see this evil dog killing the neighbor, getting vicious on its owners, as well as the family. So if anything, if you want to avoid a cruel summer, stay away from this evil dog.
Yeah, this is one of the movies where my pro-dog bias really kind of hampers my enjoyment of the movie. I can watch, humans get dismembered, decapitated, turned into mulch. Doesn't bother me, but if anything bad happens to a dog, I just go into like an absolute frenzy state. So, can't really say that I enjoyed the core concept of this one all that much.
Exactly. And did you want to say anything else about Stephen King with this film? Because again, I mean, that's what struck me was again, it was a screenplay and a novel based on Stephen King.
I think the one thing, I remember reading an article where he said he was really kind of upset that Dee Wallace didn't get a Best Actress nomination for the movie, and I kind of agree with him there. I think she does really turn in a really great performance in a very kind of unique sort of role. I mean, it's not every day that you have to show so much emotion in such a cramped sort of situation as an actress. So I think he's got some valid points there. She's definitely the highlight of the movie, and as far as I'm concerned, she is the best mom in horror history, hands down.
She is, and again, for her motherly roles and other roles that she's portrayed in, I mean, I think she's a very talented actress. She appears at convention centers, and I give her a lot of credit. They haven't really noted her as a screen queen, but she is still recognizable and acknowledged for the work that she has done.
Yep, and moving along in the countdown, we were not kidding about this being Stephen King heavy. We have another Stephen King adaptation coming at number 8 from 1985. I want to see, you may have to correct me here, it is Silver Bullet.
Yes, and that was another screenplay by Stephen King, but the novel was called Cycle of the Werewolf. And again, I mean, I don't hate this movie, but it's still at the bottom of the list because, all right, as weird as this may sound, I mean, I prefer vampires as opposed to werewolves. I mean, the werewolf effects were great, and it does have a memorable cast with Gary Busey portraying Uncle Red, Corey Haim as Marty, Megan Follows, who will always be my Aunt Shirley, as Jane, and I will add that I met Megan Follows at DragonCon 2017. Again, very friendly, very approachable, and I was glad to experience that once-in-a-lifetime situation. But going back to Silver Bullet, and again, this ties in with the COVID situation because the plot has an unsolved mystery with werewolves, where it gets to the point where the 4th of July celebration was canceled. There is a curfew. So if you don't want to get attacked by this werewolf, meaning that you can't really go out. And it goes back to our situation where if you don't want to get infected with this life-threatening virus, then events are canceled. However, Marty, the protagonist, uses the silver bullet to go out in the middle of the night to light fireworks. It attracts the werewolf, but thankfully Marty escapes. So again, as we go throughout our social lives, gatherings, I mean, there are restrictions and alterations, but we still find that way to, have a good time, just storm in some entertainment, because even during the pandemic, life goes on. And again, that really stuck out with comparing COVID with Silver Bullet.
Yeah, and this is a very unique and sort of unorthodox werewolf movie. It's kind of a hybrid. It's part werewolf movie, part murder whodunit. So you're kind of guessing, okay, there's a killer in this town. Who is it? Okay, we know it's the werewolf, obviously, but who's actually the werewolf? So, and without spoiling the ending, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, at one point, the werewolf gets hit in the eye with a firework. So obviously, the next day, the one guy in town who doesn't have an eye anymore is going to be the killer, right? So not much of a mystery and a guessing game. But there's a lot of really small things I liked about this movie. I like the fact that you actually had a positive depiction of someone with a handicap in a horror movie, because a lot of times they're kind of used as stock characters, kind of used as one-dimensional and just kind of fodder for the bad guys. So that gives it definitely a very unique vibe. I think, like Cujo, I was surprised by just how subplot heavy this movie was. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, especially early on with the victims. So they're not just being thrown straight into the wolves, literally in this case, and just being dispatched without any sort of character development. And of course, the best thing about this movie to me, and this is usually the best thing about any movie he's in, Gary Busey. Just bringing that oddball uncle weirdness in every single scene he's in. I think it really makes it kind of feel a little bit more, endearing, kind of charming. There's a sense of safety he brings to the movie that I think that you wouldn't have any other character actor. And I just want to see him in every monster movie, to be honest with you.
Yes, and Gary Busey has a lot of charisma. I actually did some more research on him, and he's appeared in TV shows like The Apprentice and Dancing with the Stars. He also did movies such as Piranha 3DD, The Firm, Point Break, Lethal Weapon, DC Cab. Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to converse with him at the conventions, but again, seems pretty straightforward, also welcomes his fans, and they acknowledge him for the work that he does, and he deserves it. Like, his hard acting work has paid off.
Yeah, let's have, one final comment about Silver Bullet before we move on here. Is I actually like this movie a whole lot more than most people do. I think a lot of horror purists kind of consider one of the lower tier Stephen King adaptations. But I think the one thing, and this is a demerit across the board, no matter how much you love the movie, the werewolf in this movie looks kind of substandard. I went online and everybody says the same thing. It looks like a bear.
Yes, and I have to agree with that too. It was very similar to a bear.
So it might actually be like a werebear movie. I think that would be a more fitting title for it. We don't see too many of those.
Yeah. Well, like they say with werewolves in London, I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand. So who knows? Maybe it could have been a mixture of a real werewolf and a bear. You never know these days.
And once you have the Warren Zevon quote, you got to move on to number 7, right?
Exactly.
All right, so we have coming in at number 7 from 1981. Again, you are the expert with the dates here. Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse, one of his more underrated and underappreciated movies, in my opinion.
Yes, and The Funhouse. Mm-hmm. The Funhouse, which, like you said, which was released in 1981. Now, I have to say, and again, I think I have this in the middle of my list here, I really like this low-budget film because it brings out the plot in the very beginning. Like, in the first scene, you know the storyline, where it's going to be about a cursed carnival. They identify the protagonist. And this movie also resembles Psycho, Friday the 13th, and Halloween. And just to break it down here, in the first scene where Amy, the main protagonist, is getting ready for her first date with her boyfriend Buzz, where her younger brother Joey, who is also a monster movie fanatic, pretends to stab her in the shower, which scares the bejesus out of her. So there's the Psycho spinoff there. Regarding Friday the 13th, they were warned to avoid the carnival, don't go anywhere near there. However, Amy and her friends decided to get high and go there, and also take on a very odd adventure to spend the night in the Funhouse. And then the Halloween part is in the ending where Amy knows that she is the only survivor, and her attacker is charging right at her. And again, she's traumatized, she's exhausted, but still, she has to defeat that enemy. So again, I think that that's what I enjoy about this film. And also, for a thrifty carnival, did you see that? That was loaded. They had a magic show, a fortune teller, freaky exhibits, like a lot of events. When I used to go to carnivals, they would have the basic Ferris wheel, bumper cars, the walk-in haunted house, the junk food, but that's pretty much about it. But these kids had it made for a carnival with a bad reputation.
Yeah, certainly the early 1980s, I think, was definitely the peak for the traveling carnival industry in the United States. When you look at Tobe Hooper's career, he's kind of defined by 2 movies. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which might be coming up a little bit later in the countdown. No spoilers there. And also Poltergeist. And I think this movie kind of thematically to me, as far as atmosphere and tone, is kind of like a mixture. It's somewhere between those 2 movies where you'd find The Funhouse, where it's got enough of the really sort of, brutal, hardcore horror elements, but also has sort of a campy, fun, not quite family-friendly vibe, but a certainly more accessible vibe than something like Eaten Alive or even Life Force.
Yes, and I would say the hilarious parts of this movie were in the ending, when a weary Amy walks home, the animatronic fat lady who is perched on top of the funhouse is just laughing hysterically. And again, she's just walking in silence, like still, just still like still in like, I was going to say not trauma. Well, yes, she is in trauma, but just again, just still reminiscing of what had happened the night before. Another hilarious element of the movie is the deformed figure. I mean, really creepy thing. Red-eyed, white hair, sharp tooth, paying the prostitute, and that does not go well. And he slaughters her because she would not pay him back. I mean, you could tell it's some of those. It does add that sick type of comedy in the Funhouse. But overall, I like this film for, again, to watch at your leisure.
Yeah, this is one of those movies where, growing up as a kid, I wasn't really that big of a fan of it. But, as I've gotten older and a little bit mellower, I've kind of come to appreciate its subtle nuances. So give it a couple more years. I think it'll be in the higher pantheon of cult classics.
Oh, no.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, and moving from a cult classic to probably like the most mainstream pop cultural horror movie ever made. You think summer, you think horror, obviously you think, coming in number 6, Jaws. I mean, really, what more can be said about this movie at this point?
Jaws. Well, it's a Steven Spielberg movie. It came out in 1975, I believe. Yes, I'm almost positive it was 1975. So, believe it or not, this movie is celebrating 45 years. And Jaws, on a side note, was mostly shot on Martha's Vineyard. So whenever I visit there, I like to look out at the pier where the water is and the boats are and just see where Jaws is filmed and, again, pretend I'm a part of the movie. And I recently watched Jaws, I don't know, several weeks ago for maybe like the 100th time. And to me, this is the deceiving COVID movie. There are so much similarities where in Jaws there's the refusal to close the beaches, thinking that tourists will go crazy just being barricaded in their homes. So they let the beaches stay open, but use precautions, and Officer Brody agrees. However, that there is an evil lurking in the air and in the ocean, and it's our situation where you can't see or hear or smell the virus, but you feel the unpleasant presence whenever you turn a corner. Like same with Jaws, like when Jaws is not around. I mean, like you just know that it's there, and investigation is required. It's all over the news. And once encountered with the shark, bam, you are a victim. So it's all about avoidance, and Jaws really brings it out with this sub-movie. And the ending always cracks me up when Officer Brody and Richard Dreyfuss have to paddle back to shore with what is left with their boat. Come on, guys. I mean, you're lucky that you survived. And if anything, that'll just be a way to take it all in. You're right in the middle of the ocean. You got to swim to shore. What more to add on to this story?
Yeah, just let me start off by saying that is an absolutely brilliant analysis of comparing Jaws to COVID-19. I never would have made that connection. You just described it perfectly. That was like spot on, A+ right there. And for me, Jaws is one of those movies where this is one of those rare horror movies where even people who hate horror movies absolutely adore this movie. It's kind of like in the same league as The Shining, and Poltergeist, where people don't normally get into the hardcore stuff, still enjoy this one. And I must have seen this movie, I don't know, 30, 40 times growing up as a kid. It's just one of those things where it seemed to be shown on TBS like every other day, and I always watched it. So I'm not as big a fan of this movie as a lot of people are, but I certainly appreciate it for what it does. And for me, kind of what you were saying, sort of the beauty of the movie and the suspense is the fact that so much isn't actually shown. Like, you don't actually see the shark really until the very end of the movie, and all the kills are very kind of obfuscated. It's kind of that first-person perspective. It's through, jump cutting. It kind of tricks you into thinking you're seeing more than you actually are, but it's a really sort of, minimalist movie. I mean, there's very, very little blood. You see very, very little, actual, bodily harm in the movie, but it's just so intense and it's so well shot and it's framed so well that are thinking, wow, I'm just witnessing so much carnage. But it just
Right.
works.
Yes, and again, you just don't know when Jaws is going to be perking up. And also, I had the pleasure of meeting Richard Dreyfuss at this past Days of the Dead in February, and I value it because it was literally 2 or 3 weeks before this pandemic. I mean, that was like one of the last social events. I was going to say networking. I also got to work the con. I met some of my favorite stars. Yes, Richard Dreyfuss was one of the sweetest men ever. And for someone who, again, he had a long line of fans. He was not feeling well that day, but he really stood out. He was very strong. He appreciated his fans. I mean, we all gave him compliments. So, again, that was a very good experience. And again, just to encounter that before hell broke out, if you know what I mean. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I compare Jaws to the COVID situation.
Yeah, I'm going to go off on one tangent about Days of the Dead because I really wanted to go that one. I had the press pass, I had my car ready to go, and then all of a sudden freak snowstorm breaks out, so I missed it. And I'm still ruining the day. So I just have...
When and if, or no, should I say when? Because these cons will go up. We got to think positive. These cons will be back, and when they do start up again, I suggest, try to go to as much as possible because they're a lot of fun. I mean, they're very eventful.
Okay, and did I miss any people cosplaying as Mr. Holland's Opus?
Not that I can recall, but I'm sure that there were a lot of questions about Mr. Holland's Opus because that was another big hit for Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah, those are the two movies. You always think Mr. Dreyfuss, he's been in, hundreds of movies, but those are two it always goes back to, Jaws and Mr. Holland's Opus. So how about that for bookends?
It is. So he did well. I was going to say, he did really well that weekend. I'm very proud of him.
All right, and moving into the top 5 in our countdown, we are sticking to the 1970s here with the other Tobe Hooper movie in our countdown from 1973, The Mortal Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I was thinking about this when I was looking at the countdown. I grew up in the South, the deep South. So, looking at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is kind of my milieu. It's my upbringing. It's what I kind of grew up around. But you grew up in New England. So I was kind of wondering, from your perspective, when you're watching these movies and you're watching stuff like The Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you're living all the way up there in Connecticut, I mean, that kind of give you sort of a skewed view of what the South was actually like, that we're all a bunch of, cannibals and live in the swamp and, eat children?
It's interesting that you ask that because not at all. I mean, that type of perspective has never crossed my mind. When we prepared for this, I saw that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was at the top of your list. Like, that was the movie to see. But with that being said, there's always been a debate with this film. Is it based on a true story?
Yes. So we have the opening from John Larroquette at the very beginning of the movie talking about how it's supposedly based on a true story. Well, sort of, but not really. I mean, do you know the backstory? You want to tell it, or you want to let me have the ground floor?
Let's get the ground floor.
All right. So basically, it's kind of the worst kept secret in horror that the idea of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on the character of Ed Gein. Ed Gein, a real-life guy who lived in Wisconsin, basically had a really bad Oedipus complex. He grew up in a farmland. His mother died. And he was into some very disturbing things involving dead bodies. Like when the police investigated his farmhouse, they found, chandeliers made out of human hands and, all sorts of weird dressings. Like he would dig up dead bodies and wear their skin around the house. So not really the kind of guy you want invited to your next party. But
Sounds like a Leatherface Part 2.
Exactly, and that's where they're kind of saying that he was kind of the inspiration behind Leatherface. Also, the inspiration for the main villain in Silence of the Lambs and a whole host of other horror movies, all kind of owe at least some sort of acknowledgement to the real world crimes of Ed Gein. So that's kind of the root of where they kind of say it's based on a true story, but totally nothing like that. There's no comparison to the actual crimes that he did and what's depicted in the movie. One tangent, if you do want to see a movie that's kind of authentic about Ed Gein, from 1974, it's a Canadian movie called Deranged, which is kind of a true life retelling of his crimes. But here's the really freaky, creepy part. Guess who plays Ed Gein in this movie?
Gunnar Hansen?
No, even freakier. It's the old guy from Home Alone, the shovel
No
killer.
kidding.
Yeah, he plays Ed Gein. So, that's a really great movie. One of the great unsung exploitations of Canadian horror cinema of the 70s for sure. But yeah, that's basically the story of Texas Chainsaw Massacre being based on a quote-unquote true story. But that's neither here nor there.
Right. And again, I mean, I think I had it on, I was going to say low to middle of the list. Because again, to me, it's just another a typical slasher horror movie where the plot is Sally and her disabled brother and their friends go on a detour to their family's old farmhouse. And then they discover psychotic, murderous outcasts next door. And this tagline is, who will survive and what will be left of them? And Sally, the protagonist and sole survivor, she went through so many obstacles to survive. And I love how she hysterically screams and laughs in the ending as the hitchhiker sped away. Well, actually, there is a hitchhiker in the beginning of the movie, so I'm going to say her driver, her rescuer. So, correction, her rescuer sped away from Leatherface. I mean, she is relieved, ecstatic, and hopes and prays that she will never encounter this incident again. And then also, as you look back, you just see Leatherface just swinging the chainsaw and ticked off because he couldn't defeat Sally. And that's how the movie ends. So I could see why that would attract horror fans to this, to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, and my taste buds are always evolving and changing, but if I had to, I would say Texas Chainsaw Massacre is easily one of my top 5 favorite horror movies ever. I think one of the things is, it came out in 1973, so it's been decades and decades. I am convinced this is the most ripped-off horror movie of all time. I have seen so many movies that have tried to do exactly what this movie does, and 50 years later, nothing has come close to actually, capturing just the organic madness of this movie. It really feels like sort of like some hippie, psychotropic, drug-crazed snuff film in a lot of ways. And it feels so authentic and freaky and idiosyncratic, but it's also kind of a fun and funny movie despite all of the depravity and madness and mayhem. And
right. And even some of the cosplays. I've seen some of the Leatherface cosplays. I mean, they're authentic, but you could tell, it's not the real, it's not the real character. It's not the real movie. It's still, they're trying. They're just trying to emphasize it, but then again, it's just, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre really just stood out alone.
Yeah, and just to wrap up on Texas Chainsaw Massacre before we move along here, and, looking back on this movie, there's so many really sort of cool idiosyncratic parts to it. I think the thing that really struck me most about this particular movie is you go back and you watch it now. People talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre like it's an absolute bloodbath of all time. If you go and watch this movie, it's just hours and hours of gore and mayhem and entrails. But if you actually go back and screen it, it's pretty much a bloodless movie. It's very, very, very tame and dry compared by today's standards. And I think it's just one of those things where it has that sort of psychological angle to it, where it kind of tricks your brain to think you're seeing more than you actually do. To me, this is a really great example of minimalistic independent cinema. And if you're talking about a summertime movie, look at the actual filming here. It was filmed in Texas, I think outside of Austin, in the middle of summer. So during the scene where our heroine is actually tied up and being beat over the head with a hammer with the real dead animals, it was like 110 degrees in there. So
yeah, it was very hot during filming.
So you can pretty much see the misery and just the summertime sadness. I can't believe I'm quoting Lana Del Rey in this podcast, but yeah, definitely a very summery movie and just a great American cinema classic in my opinion. I might be overstating a little bit, but we're all entitled to our opinions, right?
It's all good.
All right, and moving along, going from the 1970s to the 1980s, another one of my all-time favorite horror movies, Return of the Living Dead. So what gives this such a summery, aesthetic and appeal to you, in your opinion?
Oh, fudge! And James, no wonder this is your second top movie because eating brains apparently makes the pain go away.
This is one of the most brilliant horror movies, and certainly I think probably the most influential zombie movie since Night of the Living Dead, because they introduced the intelligent zombies, the fast-moving zombies, the zombies that can actually, enunciate. And there's just
Yes.
so many great things about this one.
Ooh, I mean, I could sit here and just analyze this for hours, but I know that's not the case. But I mean, the makeup effects are phenomenal, and it's also a revolution of the mid 1980s. I mean, so much nostalgia in this movie with the clothing, the jewelry, walking with radios, the drugs, the partying, a punk pop and rock soundtrack. Some of my favorite tunes are Burn the Flames, Party Time by the 45 Grave, Love Under Will, which is one of my favorites, by the Jet Blackberries. I could listen to this all day, every day, 5 times a day. And of course, the Tonight, We'll Make Love Until We Die by SSQ. And there's so many memorable quotes as well. Send more paramedics, send more cops. And it's all because Freddy and his boss unintentionally released a gas that reanimates the dead. It came from a military experiment in a supply warehouse. And it's funny seeing him and his boss transition to zombies throughout the film, where they're pale, they're cold, they have no temperatures, and at the end it makes it really, really creepy. And also, I'd like to add that the Return of the Living Dead cast came to Days of the Dead 2013, and that consisted of Alan Trotman, who portrayed Tarman, and is still an actor and puppeteer, Tom Matthews, Don Caffa, Jewel Shepard, Beverly Randolph, Linnea Quigley, and so many others. And you could tell that they, even after all these years, they are still very close and that they enjoyed the movie.
There are just so many great little things about this movie. I mean, there's a lot of great big things with the movie. I like the idea of having the totally indestructible zombies. I think it's just a brilliant, brilliant sort of plot device that makes it stand out from a lot of other contemporary genre movies. But it's the very small things, like the really weird, eccentric things. Like I like the fact that 2 of the main characters in the movie are called Bert and Ernie.
Yes, I was about to say, I had to watch this movie a few times before it sunk in that there was a Bert and Ernie in this film.
Some filmmakers are referencing, the works of, Ingmar Bergman and Antonioni, but the guys behind Return of the Living Dead, they're doing Sesame Street.
A horror version of Sesame Street. And yes, and I was able to converse about Return of the Living Dead with Alan Trotman. Yes, Trotman, because a great performance. And he said it was a fun but very challenging experience, as it was very uncomfortable makeup, prosthetics, and costume. He was also unable to see, and primarily went by sound, like sound as when chasing the group, also trying to track down Tina. But either way, where he moved, he was able to get more brains.
I just can't say enough about this movie. I almost want to do like a full podcast talking about how great Return of the Living Dead is. I mean, the fact that you have a zombie movie set in Louisville, Kentucky, of all places to put a zombie movie, who would ever thought of doing that? I mean, you've got Linnea Quigley turning in, I think, probably her most iconic role is Trash, the punk rocker who has one of the most iconic dancing scenes in horror history before being, devoured alive by a bunch of cannibals.
And then, of course, turns into the redheaded naked zombie.
The best kind of zombie, right?
Yes.
And I guess...
Well, I mean, from a guy's perspective, that is. So.
I say everybody's perspective. We're all inclusive here at Uncommon Journalism. I think really, and before moving on from Return of the Living Dead, I guess be here all day. I'm just going to start rambling. I have to acknowledge this is also part of the holy septology of the greatest character actor, in my opinion, of the 1980s, Miguel Nunez. So this is part of his 6 films. I want to list these very quickly to kind of show just how diverse he is as an actor. Okay, here are his star roles. Return of the Living Dead, Friday the 13th Part 5, Street Fighter, Joanna Man, Slam Dunk Ernest, and Leprechaun 4 in Space. One man, all of those movies.
Yes, and all in 1 year, I take it?
Well, if it was in 1 year, I don't know how he could survive, but...
Yeah, because I was going to say, wow, I mean, because I know that Friday the 13th Part 5 also came out in 1985, same year as Return of the Living Dead, but some of the others, okay, I mean, I was going to say, hey, if they were the same year, then, I mean, congratulations to him, but I think, again, they probably were before, after, but still, that's a lot of movies that he portrayed in.
Yeah, it's like it's a time frame from like 1985 to 2002, so either, Mr. Nunez really is a big fan of taking challenging, diverse roles, or he needs a new agent.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it was a very good cast. And R.I.P. to the James Karen.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
He was the German cremator, right?
Yes, and he also had a role in Poltergeist as well.
Oh wow, that guy. So many great characters. Where do you get all this stuff? I mean, are you like me, just like cruise IMDb at work all day and just kind of write stuff down?
I don't know. I guess because I mean, this is my side job. I mean, obviously, I can't research this kind of work as a legal assistant, but as a side job, freelance writer. I mean, I guess if it's something that really piques my interest, that means that I just Google it and then I just dig deep further and then just make a note of it, and I know it's something I want to write about.
And that is good career advice to everybody. That's coming from this award-winning journalist guy from somewhere in Atlanta. All right.
Somewhere in Atlanta.
So somewhere, it's kind of above, beyond, somewhere. Just follow the smell. That's all I can say.
Exactly.
All right. So number 3 on our countdown of the summertime scares from 1983, the iconic summer camp slasher movie, Sleepaway Camp. I have so many things to say about this movie, but I will let you get the ball rolling on this one.
Sure, I was going to say, let's get on a roll, because I have a lot to say as well. First, the tagline is, "You won't be coming home." And James, eccentric Aunt Martha would be thrilled that this is another one of your top movies. Oh, yes, I am so glad that this is one of your top 3 ratings. Oh, yes, it is. Because we could not put it as a low ratings. Oh, no, absolutely not. No, if it were one of the low ratings, then audiences would not see it. Oh, I am just delighted that this is one of the top ratings and that audiences will want to watch Sleepaway Camp. Oh, yes, don't you think so?
See, the best part is you couldn't see this because the podcast, she actually had the string tied around her finger the entire time she said that.
Yes, she did.
Oh, wow. This is just... it's one of those things where I remember reading a review that said basically Sleepaway Camp is the perfect combination of Friday the 13th and Meatballs, except it's funnier than Meatballs and it's scarier than Friday the 13th. And I think that's just a perfect way to encapsulate this movie.
It is. And it's a very twisty horror movie because, again, you really don't know who the killer is until the end. And throughout the film, well, I mean, more toward the end, Ricky is accused of being the killer because of everyone bullying Angela. I mean, he defended her because, I mean, she had kids throwing sand at her, and then Judy and Meg also threw her in the water. Also, Kenny taunted her for just remaining silent. But, oh, dear Kenny got his karma in the end because... he's just sitting underneath the canoe in the water, and he goes, "Hey, Baba-ree-bop! Hey, Baba-ree-bop!" I know I can't sing. Don't make fun of me. But afterwards, down he goes, and then he drowns. And then you find him in the next morning just dead with a water snake slithering on him because he had also tormented some of the camp counselors about the water snakes as well as he tried to tip the boat. So... needless to say, this guy got his payback.
There is just so many great things about this movie. I mean, from the death scenes to the soundtrack to the all-time classic twist ending, which I mean, everybody's seen the movie by now, but I'm just telling you, I mean, for this movie to come out in 1983 to kind of have that, out there of an ending is just absolutely mind-blowing to me.
Right. And I was able to interview Felissa Rose back at Days of the Dead 2015. And this was by far one of my most fun and easiest and energetic interviews because her answers was exactly as I was expecting, where her worst enemies in the film were actually her best friends. Once she was finished filming the movie, she did not want to go back to the academic life. I mean, seriously, like you just did a summer horror production. Why would you want to go back to your daily boring life? And as Felissa appears in conventions, she is just astonished how nearly 40 years later that fans still want to pose with her mouth gaping open. Obviously not with the prop. Yeah, obviously not with the prop, but again, I mean, they always want to pose with her with that ending scene, and she enjoys it. And again, I really like Felissa Rose. I mean, not only does she have a very good spirit, but she's a very talented actress, and this all ties into my interest in Sleepaway Camp.
Every now and then you'll watch a movie that gives you a certain phobia of something that you really didn't think would be something so terrifying. And for me, this movie has given me like a lifelong phobia of curling irons.
Yes, I could see that because, well, it's not every day that, like the worst enemy would be raped and then burned with a curling iron, especially in the dark cabin.
Whew, I wonder what they did to their insurance.
I don't know, but, well, again, needless to say, Judy got her karma.
She did. And I think probably my favorite character in the entire movie has a very, very small part, and that's the really, really witchy camp counselor, Meg, M-E-G, Meg, with her giant hairdo, like the ponytail is like the size of, Nebraska.
The name is Meg, M-E-G.
So I never actually went to summer camp, so did I miss out on anything? Was it actually kind of like comparable to this, or?
Who knows? I mean, like they said, the tagline with Sleepaway Camp is, "You won't be coming home." And if you ever see the poster of the movie, it has a letter from one of the kids to their parents saying, "Dear Mom and Dad, I've been at Sleepaway Camp for 3 weeks and I'm getting scared, blah, 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 blah." I mean, obviously, like, it goes, it goes to where, like, the sneaker is broken through the knife. But, again, I really like how that letter starts because, again, you know that it is a horror movie and it's going to make audiences think, wow, I mean, after seeing this, should I really go to summer camp or should I stay in the safety of my house?
Yeah. And of course, Sleepaway Camp followed up by a couple of sequels, kind of controversial. People seem to really enjoy them or kind of despise them. I really, really like Sleepaway Camp too. I know it's a discussion for another day, but this one is still really, really, really near and dear in my heart. And if you haven't seen Sleepaway Camp by now, what are you waiting for? It's an all-time classic.
It's great. I mean, and again, the Sleepaway Camp franchises, they have become cult classics. So again, just to piggyback what you said, watch them. I mean, with the COVID and the pandemic going on, we have time, so watch them.
All right, and closing into number 2 on our countdown, I believe this is the most recent movie we actually have on our countdown. Very close to being a unanimous pick for both of us. Another Stephen King adaptation. Who'd have thunk it? From 2017. It is It.
It. And again, this was my second top movie, and overall, I thought it was a phenomenal remake because it really focuses on these kids defeating the interdimensional demon. I do like the TV horror movie, which I believe was back in 1990, but I mean, they kept going from the past to the present and then back to the past and the present, where this movie It, released in 2017, which they considered the first chapter, is they analyzed more of the outcasts. They formed the Losers Club. It also focuses on the kids' weaknesses and fears, and better yet, it also takes place in the summer of 1989. And they made it really authentic. They made it seem like, it took place during that year by hearing New Kids on the Block and The Cure and The Cult. Also seeing where they went into town of Derry, Maine, and the arcades. You could also see posters of Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Batman, and other popular films that came out that year.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things about this movie. I kind of went into it with really sort of low expectations, but it really exceeded what I was kind of anticipating from the movie. I think it's vastly superior to the TV movie in a lot of ways. I think it's certainly better than It Part 2, which came out last year, but again, that's an aside. But yeah, pretty much everything you said. I mean, it just nails the late 1980s aesthetics and ambiance. I mean, as soon as you see the kids going in there and playing the original Street Fighter, I'm like, yes, they get it. They understand the time
I
and
know
the
that
trappings.
you like this type of arcades.
Yes, you're calling me home right there when you do that. When you actually have them like right in the time frame and they're historically accurate, it's even better. But one thing is, obviously, the original book was written in the time frame of the 1950s, so they had to update a little bit here. I was a little bit hesitant going into the movie about changing the time frame, but I think it actually works out very, very, very well. And I think it's certainly a great summer movie. It's a great coming-of-age movie. It's a great horror movie. And I've always said, to me, this feels like the biggest budget Freddy Krueger movie ever made. How could you possibly hate that?
Yes, and this was the Dream Child, right?
Yes, this would have been
yes.
then.
And again, I as much as I'm a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, some of the titles still kind of throw me off. I'm like, wait a minute, Dream Child, Dream Warriors, who did what? So it was, and also I do shouts out to Finn Wolfhard, who portrayed the trash mouth Richie Tozier, because when he was doing this movie, he also finished with Stranger Things Season 1. So his stardom was blossoming. I mean, nowadays he's doing really well. And then, of course, you had Beverly Marsh, who had it made, spending the evil summer with, I think, 6 or 7 other guys. And then you had Billy Boy and Ben developing feelings for her. So, again, this was great, focusing on just the kids.
Yeah, it is very rare to get a good, child cast, especially a great ensemble child cast. And I think they just knocked it out of the park this movie. This is like one of the best, youth ensemble casts I've seen in a horror movie probably ever.
I agree. A very good Stephen King remake.
Yeah, and as far as, obviously, when you're doing the translation from the book to the movie, there's going to be some omissions and some changes here and there. This is definitely a lot more accurate to the original Stephen King novel than the 1990 TV series. Even though they did kind of change the time frame and some of the characters. I don't know, was there any a change or alteration from the book that you didn't like or liked the most about the 2017 movie?
And I was aware of what was going on with the novel versus the movie, but again, I think I was just rather impressed with the effects and the makeup and the acting and the plot. Like, for example, when before Pennywise attacks Georgie, that is a very wet scene, and I could see not a smudge of that makeup is seen. And then, of course, they also have the black evil eyes. So the crew did a really good job.
Yeah, this one definitely it caught me by surprise. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was, and here's hoping we get some even better Stephen King adaptations down the road. Is there any particular Stephen King movie? I know I'm going off on a tangent again, but that's what summer's all about. Is there any particular Stephen King novel you want to see remade, with a particular cast or director?
Well, definitely not Cujo. I'm sure you know it. Yeah, I'm sure you know that. But as far as a remake, most of the ones that most of the ones that I've really liked, the remakes have already been established, like Pet Cemetery and Carrie. I would love to see a Christine remake, because it's not every day that you see a haunted, possessed car. I mean, as far as actors, I mean, there's nobody that I have particularly in mind, but that would be a good remake.
All right, and it all comes down to this. Number one in our countdown of the most summery seasonal horror movies out there, and this is one where I didn't have it as number one, but I can absolutely see why it would be number one on the countdown of summertime horror movies. From 1987, from the late great Joel Schumacher, it is The Lost Boys. And I know you are a huge fan. You've got to introduce this one.
Yes, and James, I know that this movie was not the top one, but no hard feelings. I will not give you any maggots or worms.
I can only hope so.
Okay, so The Lost Boys. This is my top one because this is a roller coaster ride. Amazing acting, dynamic drama, everlasting effects, seductive soundtrack, especially with Cry Little Sister, People Are Strange, I Still Believe, Lost in the Shadows. And what really spiked my interest is these are animalistic vampires. Like, you see typical vampire movies where they're very seductive, they're very secretive, they're very deceiving, but not this group. I mean, they charge at their prey. They live in caves, not coffins. They sleep upside down. And now Max, the slick head vampire, I will always be drawn to the dinner scene, because that famous quote where he said to Michael, "You are the man of the house, and I'm not coming in until you invite me." Michael unknowingly says, "You're invited," which renders Max powerless, which is why he failed the dinner scene. But again, the dinner scene was hysterical, especially with the garlic and the water and also the mirror. And to quote Lucy, their mom, "Now what?" Again, that was a really good element of the movie. But what really stuck out is the grandfather, who knew about the damn vampires throughout the film, and he actually saved his family.
We gotta talk about the grandpa's movie, because he is such a memorable character. I know he has that one line where he's talking about how he doesn't want them to touch his TV guide because the address curls up on it, and his favorite meal appears to be beer and Oreos.
Yes, and also one element about Grandpa is also in the dinner scene, where once Michael, again, just naively invites Max, because again, Grandpa knew this the entire time. The look on his face when Max walks into the house is priceless, because he knows very well that Max is the head vampire and what his intentions are.
Yeah, we got such a great cast. We got Corey Haim. We've got, is it Corey Haim or Corey Feldman?
Both of them are in this movie.
You get both Corys in one movie. I mean, that alone is reason to put it number one.
Right, and Kiefer Sutherland, Alex Winter, and the other vampire group. I mean, they must have enjoyed filming this movie, because it takes place on the sand, the beach, amusement park, and cliffs. On a side note, Jamie Gertz, who portrayed Star, she and her husband are now owners of the Atlanta Hawks, and Jason Patrick, who portrayed Michael, his father was Jason Miller, who was Father Karras in The Exorcist, and Jason Patrick's grandfather was Jackie Gleason. So there are a lot of close connections with this movie and the actors.
So one day you're making a teenage vampire movie, and then 20 years later you own an NBA franchise.
Exactly. Yes.
Kids never give up on your dreams.
No, they don't.
You just can't do that. I mean, The Lost Boys, one of the things I've noticed about The Lost Boys, the fandom, if you're a fan of The Lost Boys, you absolutely love this movie. They are so passionate about this particular film. So is there any sort of, specific scene or element of The Lost Boys that just makes you just so attracted to it?
Again, I think it's the hilarious scene. It's the hilarious dinner scene, because the Corey Haim's character is becoming familiar with the vampires in the area, so he gets help from the Frog Brothers. And again, although the Frog Brothers screw up that one dinner scene, they were able to defeat the vampires in the end, again, which is another scene where, again, they use garlic, they use holy water, they use bright light, anything to perish the vampires. And by the time Kiefer Sutherland, who was David, yes, because throughout the movie you're thinking that David is the head vampire. So once he dies, and you see that Michael, Star, and Laddie do not revert back to their normal selves, it makes you wonder, okay, this scene is not over, the movie is not over, there is still a vampire out there.
And of course, how can anyone forget great lines like death by stereo?
Death by stereo, you got it.
Oh man, it's a really good movie. I forgot how much I enjoyed this one when I rewatched it recently. Now, just one more thing about The Lost Boys before we wrap up here. Something I was not aware of until recently. They actually made like 3 or 4 sequels of this.
They did. I have not seen any. Again, maybe I might watch them at my leisure, or if I have nothing to do. But once I saw The Lost Boys several times, I guess I just stuck with the very first one from 1987.
Yeah, I mean, you know what you're getting with this one. You're getting some high quality, late 80s vampire goodness. So I can't fault you there. All right, well, that's pretty much all we've got here on our summertime scares list. Do you have any concluding words for our listeners, Kristen?
Yes, I mean, whether you are infected by a vampire, a werewolf, or you are stranded on an island, a carnival, or a graveyard, again, you cannot escape. And just for emotional reasons, please stay away from that possessed dog.
Truer words have never been spoken. I can't think of a better line to go out on than that. We are Uncommon Journalism, uncommonjournalism.blogspot.com. We're looking for writers, we're looking for submissions, and if you like our content, let us know, and we'll keep getting more stuff for you. All right, so James Swift here signing off. Kristen M. Gilotti signing off. We'll be seeing you shortly.
All right, until next time, take care.
See you later, kids.